And now I hand over to my boss for the closing.
I'll be brief because we have an extra small event to go to this evening, which I hope you'll all be able to join us at. So my name's Aaron Quigley again, the head of school here in Computer Science and Engineering. Before we leave, I'd just like us all to kind of pause for a moment to just think about the impact that one life has had on other members of the family, on students, on colleagues, on the research community, on software, on open source systems. This is quite of an inspiring story, I hope you would all agree, to think about one person who came, who taught, who put forward ideas to a group of students who then carried forward that legacy out into the world, which then of course changed how teaching went about, how other people saw software. He was of course invited to Bell Labs several times with his family. And I think that's the power of what we have here today. By bringing us all together, just this one life has had a legacy that's rippled on through many years, even after John unfortunately left the world too early. So today when we look at the open source community, it's a global community. It's everywhere. It underpins so many different pieces of the digital infrastructure that we actually take for granted in our day-to-day life. We can pick out things like financial services. We can pick out next generation tracking systems for drone control. We can even pick out things like software that's gone to Mars, all of which is underpinned by open systems and open source technologies. And there's a real hunger out there to think about what the next generation of open source software might look like. But of course, there is one problem in this. There's probably many problems in this. And this graphic, I hope, carries forward that anybody who's involved in the open source community will know that this problem exists. That there's a huge amount of the digital infrastructure that's out there today that we rely upon in our healthcare systems, in going to space, in traffic control systems, in government, the financial services industry, and it's all built on potentially highly unsupported pieces of open source software. So one thing we're going to try to do here in UNSW is to create a new center which is going to focus on this topic and really hone in on what it actually means to lift up the next generation of open source software development. So it'll be thinking about deriving the sustainability of open source as a community. It'll be thinking about improving the infrastructure for open source development. What would that actually look like? And we'll also be thinking about growing the open source talent pool globally. And we hope this will become a leading light in the open source and open system community worldwide. The other thing that we're pleased to announce, although we don't have a huge amount of detail, is the John Lyons Prize, which is going to be named after John. And this is going to be aligned to the Center for Critical Digital Infrastructure. It's going to try to recognize and support excellence in important open source projects that are in this world of critical digital infrastructure. And it's going to be giving out $100,000 a year, which can be taken in different forms, either as cash or as prizes for people coming to Australia to work on open source software development, or to support students going out to work on these topics in the world at large. And there'll be additional prizes coming on if and when we can gather more sponsorship. So the last thing I'd like to do before we head off together is to just introduce our Vice Chancellor and President, Ian Jacobs, who has some closing words that he'd like to share with us.
Hello, colleagues and friends. I send my best wishes to all who have gathered on this auspicious occasion to honour the life and the work of Professor John Lyons. I'm sorry I'm unable to join you in person, but I particularly want to acknowledge John's widow, Marianne, and Scientia Professor Gernot Heiser, inaugural John Lyons Chair of Operating Systems since 2009, and any of John's former colleagues and students who may be there today. What a life we remember today, what a brilliant mind, and what great fortune for UNSW that John Lyons chose to teach here. We often talk about teachers who we remember because of their ability to instill a love of learning. UNSW computer science students in the 1970s most certainly remember John Lyons and will be grateful to have learned from the very best. From what I've heard, John saw teaching as a vocation, not just a career, always available to students for a chat, even after they'd passed through the UNSW gates as graduates. But it wasn't just UNSW that felt John's influence. It was felt around the world through a production of a commentary on the 6th edition Unix operating system. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I have any great knowledge of Unix, but I found it fascinating to see the accounts of just how profound an impact the Lyons book had on the fundamentals of computer coding. The fact it was the most famous suppressed manuscript in computer history gives an idea of how incisive John's work was, and your devotion to his memory through this wonderful global event is a sign of the esteem in which John is held. I think the fact he stayed on good terms with the Unix creators and even spent time at the Bell Labs in the US while official distribution of his book was deemed illegal by AT&T management says a lot about his professionalism and collegiality. Both are core attributes that UNSW values and asks our students to embrace. And in John Lyons, we have a wonderful role model. I'm sad that I never got to meet John, but on this, the 45th anniversary of the commentary and the 25th anniversary of the book being officially published, I hope that more people get to know of his brilliance. I hope you enjoyed the lectures and sharing John Lyons' stories, and I hope you're delighted by the new light installation in the John Lyons Garden. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to contribute to the event.
So before we close, it's my pleasure to invite you all down to the John Lyons Garden, where we will have the rededication of the garden this evening and also the lighting of the tree for the very first time. So as we leave, if you please just follow the people ahead of you and just walk down through the Scientia and then head down to the John Lyons Garden. We'll begin the ceremony in a few moments. Thank you very much.